with the backdoor cut, couldn't find her. Suarez right through two, up with the left, and that's what she can do, folks.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about the Marta Suarez situation and why this whole thing, whether you want to call it a trade situation, a waiver situation, or just roster maneuvering, might actually be a very, very good outcome for the Indiana Fever. And I know a lot of people are still confused, still asking why would this be a positive? So let's really break this down properly. First of all, going back to draft night, there was a lot of noise, a lot of chatter around the Indiana Fever potentially being interested in Marta Suarez with that 10th overall pick. Now, whether that was smoke, whether that was real, we don't fully know, but let's just operate under the assumption that there was at least some level of truth to it. Because if that is true, if the Fever actually valued Marta Suarez as someone worthy of that 10th pick, then what has now happened is basically best-case scenario asset management. They can now go out and potentially get Marta Suarez for free without spending draft capital. That's a huge swing in value. Now, me personally, I didn't have Marta Suarez as a first-round level talent. I didn't think she was worth that 10th pick. I didn't even think she was a lock first-rounder. But value in the WNBA draft is always relative to team needs, roster construction, and projection. So if Indiana internally believes she was worth it, then this is objectively a win for them if they can now acquire her without using that pick. At the same time, I want to be very clear. I don't know how true those rumors are. I don't know how seriously the Fever were considering Marta Suarez at 10. But even if it's partially true, the outcome still benefits them. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting, because this whole situation directly ties into Justine Pissott. And I think we all need to be honest about where Justine Pissott currently stands. I think pretty much everyone agrees, fans, analysts, even her supporters, that Justine Pissott is not going to be in the day one rotation for the Indiana Fever. That's not a knock on her talent, that's just the reality of where she is in her development curve and where this roster is competitively. But then you start looking at how the Fever have handled her situation, and yeah, it does raise some eyebrows. I'm not going to sit here and accuse the Indiana Fever of faking an injury. That's a serious claim, and there's no concrete proof of that. But I do think there's a strong possibility that they were trying to protect her, maybe even hide her a little bit. And when I say hide, I mean limit exposure. Keep her out of situations where other teams can fully evaluate her in a competitive setting. And if they're being intentionally vague about her status, that could be a strategic move to discourage other teams from taking a chance on her, especially on a guaranteed contract. Now, shifting back to Marta Suarez versus Justine Pissott as prospects, this is where things get nuanced. I personally did not have Marta Suarez ranked above Justine Pissott on my pre-draft big board. Not even close, if I'm being honest. I think Pissott has the higher ceiling, better long-term shooting upside, and more projectable offensive versatility. But Marta Suarez went 9 picks earlier. That matters. Draft position changes perception whether we like it or not. So in terms of profile, Marta Suarez is a 6'3" shooter, 6th-year senior, someone who has experience, maturity, and at least one high-level shooting season that really boosted her stock. And yeah, if you watched the tournament, she had flashes, games where she looked legitimately impactful, knocking down shots, playing with confidence. So, if we're talking about readiness right now, not projection, not ceiling, but readiness, then I do think Marta Suarez has an argument. She's older, she's more physically mature, and she's probably closer to being able to contribute in a limited role immediately. But let's not get it twisted. Long term, if you're asking me who I'm taking, it's Justine Pissott every single time. 100 out of 100. No hesitation. That's not even a debate in my mind.
Now here's where the Phoenix Mercury come into play, because they are a very specific type of team. They're not rebuilding, they're not developing slowly, they are trying to win right now. And when you look at their roster construction, it has always made sense that they would be interested in a player like Justine Pissott, a bigger shooter who can stretch the floor. But now, with Marta Suarez potentially available, the equation changes. Because if you're Phoenix and you're choosing between upside and immediate contribution for a one-year window, you might lean toward Marta Suarez. She's more game-ready right now, even if her ceiling is lower. That's why I actually think the Mercury are now more likely to go after Marta Suarez instead of Justine Pissott. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about the whole wave and dev contract idea with Marta Suarez. And honestly, that logic doesn't really hold up. If a team truly wants a player on a development contract, they can just sign them directly to that deal. There's no strategic advantage in waiving first and then trying to re-sign in that way. It doesn't add up from a roster mechanic standpoint. Looking at the Golden State Valkyries, this is a team that already had a pretty full roster. They brought back a lot of their core, minus Monique Billings and Tammy Fagan-Bentley, and they added Gabby Williams. So roster spots were already tight. And then you factor in what happened with the Flauja Johnson situation, which, let's just be honest, was a terrible move. Absolutely terrible. From everything we're hearing, it sounds like that decision was heavily influenced by financial considerations. The Valkyries didn't want to pay Flauja Johnson, so they moved off her for cap flexibility. And then it gets even worse when you hear that their primary target was Hailey Van Lith. That was the player they really wanted at that spot. They were willing to take Iana Martin as a fallback, knowing they could stash her overseas, but the main goal was Van Lith, and if she wasn't available, the plan was basically to pivot, move the pick, and manage the cap. So when they ended up with Marta Suarez, it really does feel like she was not part of a long-term plan. It feels like a byproduct of the situation rather than a targeted selection. Which brings us back to the key point. They effectively used a draft asset for cap space. And while that might sound bad, it's actually not uncommon. The Indiana Fever themselves have done similar things. They've made moves to create cap flexibility so they could pay players like Kelsey Mitchell. So this isn't some unheard of strategy. Now, bringing it full circle to Phoenix again, you look at their roster, Kalia Copper, Natasha key win-now pieces. They've lost Katie Lou Samuelson, they've already cut Lorella Kuba due to injury, and suddenly there's a gap. That gap could very easily be filled by someone like Marta Suarez. And again, from a pure basketball standpoint, she fits what they need right now. A player who can come in, space the floor, and not require a long developmental runway. So yeah, I genuinely believe there's a strong chance the Phoenix Mercury go out and sign Marta Suarez. And if that happens, that is the ideal outcome for the Indiana Fever. Because the best case scenario for Indiana is actually patience with Justine Pissott. Let her develop. Let her go overseas. Let her play in Athletes Unlimited. Let her refine her game without pressure. And then bring her back next season as a more complete player, someone who can actually compete for real minutes. Because I truly believe Justine Pissott has the tools to become a future starter for the Indiana Fever. The size, the shooting mechanics, the offensive upside, it's all there. It just needs time. So yeah. When you break all of this down, what initially looks like a confusing or even questionable situation actually lines up really well for Indiana. They avoid risk, they potentially gain value, and they protect their long-term asset. That's smart team building. So yeah, that's the video. Tell me what you think, and don't forget, like and subscribe.